The early 1970 seconds marked a peculiar shift in horror cinema. After decades of monsters, screams, and orchestral stabs, something changed. Filmmakers began to embrace the quiet not as a pause between scares, but as the very essence of terror itself. These were films that rejected noise in favor of unease, that hollowed out soundtracks until only silence remained, and that silence screamed louder than anything. Audiences didn't always understand. In a theater culture trained by jump scares and dramatic monologues, these films were disorienting. Some viewers walked out, mistaking quiet for boring. Others stayed and were haunted for decades by the stillness that lingered long after the credits. It wasn't just what these movies showed, it was what they didn't say, didn't explain, and didn't fill. What happens when a film gives you too much space to think? When it refuses to guide your emotions or distract you with sound, that emptiness becomes a trapdoor. And some directors in the 60 seconds, 70 seconds, and early 80 seconds knew exactly how to open it. Now, in an age flooded by noise, digital noise, narrative noise, emotional noise, these quiet horror films feel more powerful than ever. Their restraint has aged into elegance. Their awkward silences have become their sharpest knives. We're finally catching up to what they were trying to say by not saying anything at all. So, let's sink into the stillness. Here are 15 horror films that made silence their most terrifying weapon. Number 1, Hour of the Wolf, 1968. There is madness. And then there is the silence just before it arrives. Hour of the Wolf, directed by Ingmar Bergman, is less a horror film than a psychological disintegration. It follows a painter, played by Max von Sydow, as he loses touch with reality during a retreat on a remote island. Night by night, his visions become darker, more symbolic, more real. But it's not the visions themselves that terrify, it's the silence surrounding them. Bergman strips away all cinematic crutches. No swelling score, no frantic editing, just long takes, empty room, conversations that hang in the air like smoke. Liv Ullmann plays the painter's wife, forced to watch his unraveling in silence. Her stillness becomes the film's moral center and its emotional graveyard. She listens, she waits, she watches a man disappear without making a sound. When the horror comes, it's operatic, surreal, but it only hits so hard because of what preceded it: miles of silence, of psychological tension stretched until it snaps. Hour of the Wolf is the kind of film that doesn't want to scare you for an hour. It wants to haunt you for a lifetime. And it does. Number 2, Absentia, 2011. Before The Haunting of Hill House, Mike Flanagan made Absentia a quiet, low-budget film that whispers more dread than most blockbusters ever scream. It's the story of two sisters confronting the disappearance of one's husband, missing for 7 years and now declared dead in absentia. But he may not be gone. Absentia never relies on spectacle. It moves slowly, like grief. The characters speak softly, as if afraid they might wake something. The film takes place in the daylight, in empty rooms, on quiet streets. But something is always there beneath the tunnel near the house, behind the polite conversations, under the silence. The monster, if there is one, is barely seen. It lives in the negative space, the shadows, the long pauses, and the emotional trauma of not knowing, not being able to move on, not being able to trust what's real anymore. What makes Absentia terrifying isn't what it shows, it's what it suggests. That grief creates holes in reality. That silence can grow teeth. That sometimes, something ancient and hungry waits for you to stop speaking so it can begin. Number 3. Begotten, 1990. There is no dialogue in Begotten, no recognizable language, no music, no traditional narrative. What there is instead, what remains, is something primordial and unspeakable. Directed by E. Elias Merhige, Begotten is a grainy black and white nightmare that begins with the death of God by disembowelment. From there, it descends into images of suffering, ritual, and decay. The film is silent except for a grinding, organic soundscape, creaks, gasps, distant winds. It feels like watching a sacred text that's been left to rot underground for 1,000 years. But what makes Begotten truly horrifying isn't its brutality. It's the way it erases all comfort. You can't orient yourself with plot or character. You can't predict what comes next. You're just there, stuck in a visual ritual that doesn't care whether you understand it or not. Most audiences walked out. Some critics called it nonsense, others called it genius, but everyone agreed it was unlike anything else. And that silence, the refusal to explain, to justify, to narrate, becomes the film's sharpest edge. To watch Begotten is to confront something buried deep in the human subconscious, something wordless, something still, And in that stillness, there is a kind of primal scream no sound could replicate. Number 4. The Innocents, 1961. Long before horror relied on gore or volume, there was The Innocents. Adapted from Henry James's The Turn of the Screw, this black and white masterpiece is a clinic in how to disturb without ever raising its voice. Deborah Kerr plays a governess hired to care for 2 orphaned children in a sprawling English estate. At first, everything seems proper, poised, but the cracks begin to show, shadows where they shouldn't be, footsteps in empty corridors, children who know too much and say too little. Director Jack Clayton turns silence into a weapon. Scenes stretch longer than they should. Conversations are interrupted by long pauses that say more than any line of dialogue. The absence of score in key moments forces you to hear your own breathing. The mansion itself becomes a character, vast, echoing, and indifferent. What's most disturbing is that the film never confirms whether the ghosts are real. The terror lies in ambiguity, in what's implied, in what's possibly imagined. The children's silence becomes a mirror, reflecting the governess's growing paranoia, or perhaps confirming it. The Innocents was critically acclaimed, but often overlooked by mainstream horror fans. Too quiet, too restrained, but its influence is unmistakable. You can feel its DNA in everything from The Others to The Babadook. It's the film that taught generations of filmmakers one simple truth: a whisper, delivered well, is louder than any scream. Number 5. Lake Mungo, 2008. The dead don't speak, but in Lake Mungo, they don't need to. This Australian faux documentary is structured like a true crime investigation into the drowning of a teenage girl, Alice Palmer. Her family begins to hear things, see things, and then, quietly, they discover things she never told anyone. What makes Lake Mungo chilling isn't its jump scares. It barely has any. It's the way it sits with you. The film is composed almost entirely of interviews, home videos, and news footage. There are no traditional scare setups, no swelling music cues. The silences between words, the blank stares after questions, those are where the ghosts live. As the mystery deepens, so does the atmosphere. You start to realize the real horror isn't supernatural. It's the realization that people carry entire worlds inside them that no one else ever sees. Alice's secrets are revealed in fragments, through grainy footage and accidental recordings. The effect is disorienting and deeply human. The film's most famous scene, a recovered cell phone video, contains no screaming, no violence. Just a still frame, a shape, a silence that crawls under your skin. Many viewers report feeling uneasy for days afterward, not because of what they saw, but because of what they almost didn't. Lake Mungo is a ghost story told in the quietest possible voice. It doesn't shock, it erodes, and when it ends, the silence it leaves behind feels like someone's still watching you. Number 6. The Reflecting Skin, 1990. There are films that show horror, and then there are films that marinate in it. The Reflecting Skin is the latter. Set in a sun-bleached stretch of post-war rural America, this British-Canadian production uses silence not as absence, but as suffocation. The story follows 8-year-old Seth Dove, a boy whose imagination festers in isolation. He believes his neighbor, a pale English widow, is a vampire. His older brother returns from the war, changed. Animals die mysteriously. Children disappear, but none of it happens loudly. The film plays out like a waking dream, heavy with light but hollow in sound. The silence is paradoxical. It's bright outside, the wheat fields glow, but there's no life in the air. Scenes stretch with unbearable stillness. Dialogues come in hushed tones or not at all. Emotions are buried beneath layers of visual symbolism. And the violence, when it comes, arrives without catharsis, just blunt endings and blank stares. Director Philip Ridley builds a world that's both beautiful and rotting. It's a place where innocence curdles, and silence is not peaceful, it's radioactive. The sound of a match being struck, a screen door creaking open, these become thunderclaps in an otherwise paralyzed world. The Reflecting Skin was misunderstood on release. Too strange, too slow, too quiet. But in retrospect, it's one of the most haunting meditations on childhood trauma ever filmed. Not because of what's said, but because of what's left unspoken. Number 7. Valerie and Her Week of Wonders, 1970. If horror is a dream, then Valerie and Her Week of Wonders is its most beautiful nightmare. This Czech surrealist fantasy isn't just quiet, it's lyrical, whispered. The story doesn't unfold so much as drift, like a fever through lace curtains and candle smoke. Valerie is a 13-year-old girl on the edge of womanhood. Over the course of 1 week, she encounters priests with animal faces, undead lovers, and blood-soaked weddings. But none of it is framed with urgency. The film never explains itself. It offers no clarity, only images, only silence. Director Jaromil Jarash creates a world where logic is suspended, and so is sound. Scenes unfold with little or no dialogue. A glance means more than a sentence. A bell tolls in the distance, and you're not sure if it's real. The soundtrack hums like an old lullaby slowed down to near death. Despite its beauty, the film is laced with dread. Valerie is constantly watched, touched, threatened, but she never screams. She simply moves forward wide-eyed, fearless, or perhaps in shock. The horror here is soft but invasive, like a cold breeze beneath warm sheets. At the time, Western audiences didn't know what to make of it. Was it horror? Was it coming of age? Was it political allegory? Perhaps it was all three or none. What's certain is that Valerie and her Week of Wonders lingers. It doesn't scare you in the moment. It unsettles you later, in the quiet moments, when you remember a smile that didn't belong, or a silence that lasted too long. Number 8. The Other, 1972. There's a particular stillness in childhood that adults forget. It's not peace, it's presence, a kind of focused, eerie calm. The Other captures that feeling and weaponizes it. Set in 1932 rural Connecticut, the film follows twin brothers, Niles and Holland, during a summer that grows darker with every passing day. The boys are inseparable, but something is wrong. Accidents begin to happen around them, gruesome, escalating incidents that no one can explain, and yet the film rarely raises its voice. There's no screaming, no frantic music, only long, pastoral silences interrupted by the occasional flutter of curtains or creak of wood. Director Robert Mulligan, better known for To Kill a Mockingbird, directs with restraint so precise it becomes sinister. He uses soft daylight and domestic calm to frame scenes that feel deeply wrong. The audience becomes an observer, not of horror itself, but of its slow arrival. You sense it before you see it. Chris and Martin Udvarnoky, the twin actors, deliver performances that are unreadable by design. Their innocence becomes the film's most chilling device. And when the twist arrives quietly, inevitably it recontextualizes everything you've seen. Every silence, every stare, every missing heartbeat in the sound mix. The Other was not a box office hit. Too slow, critics said. But in the years since, its influence has grown, especially among filmmakers who understand that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it hides in the way a child hums too quietly in the next room. Number 9. Let's Scare Jessica to Death, 1971. From the title alone, you might expect chaos, screams, blood, maniacs in the woods. But Let's Scare Jessica to Death is one of the quietest horror films ever made. And that's precisely what makes it terrifying. Jessica has just left a mental institution. Her husband takes her to a rural farmhouse, hoping to start over. But things aren't right. There's a strange woman living in their house. Locals whisper, a girl drowned in the lake decades ago, or didn't, or maybe she still lives there. The film offers no clear answers and no comfort. Most scenes drift like fog. Jessica wanders, observes, half hears things. But is she losing her mind again? Or is the town haunted? The film traps us in her uncertainty. We don't know what's real, because she doesn't. And instead of pushing the narrative forward with exposition, it leaves long, wordless stretches filled with nothing but ambient sound or silence. The horror here is intimate. It's internal. It's the sound of your own breathing when you're alone in a room and not sure why you're scared. The voice in Jessica's head whispers things even she doesn't understand. The stillness of the lake, the hush of the wind, they're not peaceful. They're accusatory. When the film first came out, it confused audiences. It didn't fit any mold, too quiet, too vague. But over time, it became a cult classic, especially among viewers who understood that sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's happening around you, it's what's happening inside you, slowly, quietly. Number 10, Messiah of Evil, 1973. Coastal towns in horror are often loud with storms and sea winds, but Messiah of Evil is quiet. Unnervingly quiet. This 1973 cult film takes place in a strange California beach community where the ocean seems dead and the people even deader. The story follows a young woman searching for her missing father. What she finds instead is a town infected with silence. Streets are empty, stores are open but abandoned. Locals speak in murmurs or not at all. The sky is always dusk. It feels like the end of the world happened quietly, and no one told her. What Messiah of Evil achieves, better than most horror films of its time, is the sense of ambient doom. The dread doesn't rise, it sits, it waits, it hums beneath the surface. One of the film's most famous scenes takes place in a grocery store, bathed in artificial light and near total silence. No score, no dialogue, just the sound of distant footsteps and fluorescent flickers. Many critics initially dismissed the film as disjointed. It's not linear, it's not loud. But that's the point. It's a mood piece, a visual lullaby that becomes a nightmare only if you let it sink in. And for those who do, Messiah of Evil doesn't end when the credits roll. It echoes. The film asks a terrifying question in the quietest voice. What if the apocalypse came and no one noticed? Number 11. The Appointment, 1981. The Appointment is a film where nothing happens until something unspeakable does. This obscure British horror, barely released and long unavailable, unfolds like a dream you can't quite escape. A man, a daughter, a car accident that hasn't happened yet. Or has it? The terror in The Appointment comes not from action, but from delay. Entire scenes pass in silence, with only the hum of rural landscapes or the ticking of a clock. You wait, you wonder, you dread. The sound design is nearly barren, making the rare bursts of noise feel like violations. Dialogue is minimal. Explanations are withheld. Edward Woodward plays the father with increasing unease, not hysteria, but a creeping conviction that something is wrong and getting worse. And when the horror finally arrives, it doesn't announce itself. It just happens. Brutally, without buildup, without mercy. What makes The Appointment unforgettable is its willingness to marinate in silence. It trusts the audience to feel the dread, to fill the void. And by doing so, it becomes suffocating. Some viewers called it boring, others called it broken. But to those attuned to its frequency, it's like hearing a scream just beyond the range of human hearing. This is a horror film about inevitability, about the terror of knowing something is coming, and the helplessness of silence as it approaches. The real appointment is not with death, but with dread itself. Number 12. Homebodies, 1974. Sometimes, horror hides behind politeness. Homebodies is a film about a group of elderly tenants facing eviction from their crumbling apartment building. There are no monsters, no ghosts, just urban development. But what begins as a quiet tale of resistance spirals into something far darker, one whisper at a time. The film plays like a satire at first. The old-timers bicker, drink tea, and quietly lament the loss of their neighborhood. Then, almost without warning, they begin to kill, not out of malice, but out of quiet necessity. There's no dramatic shift in tone, no musical cue, just small silences between scenes that become graveyards for morality. Homebodies never yells. Its violence is understated, often off-screen. The killers are slow, methodical, and completely undramatic, which makes it all the more unsettling. These aren't villains, they're survivors. And in their stillness, they embody a kind of creeping revenge against a world that has stopped listening to them. The silence in this film isn't suspenseful, it's resigned. It reflects lives left behind, voices ignored, rooms too empty for sound. The horror comes not from what these characters do, but from the realization that no one will ever stop them, because no one ever really saw them. Critics didn't quite know what to make of Homebodies in 1974. Was it comedy? Was it horror? In truth, it was something in between, something stranger. And now, 50 years later, its message echoes more clearly than ever. The quietest revolts are often the deadliest. Number 13. The Night Visitor, 1971. Imagine a killer who never speaks, who never screams, never taunts, never gives chase with pounding footsteps. That's the horror of The Night Visitor, a Swedish-English thriller that hides its violence behind quiet footsteps and colder intentions. The film opens in an asylum, where Salem, a man accused of murdering his sister and brother-in-law, is locked away, or so everyone thinks. Because Salem, we learn, is escaping night after night through a secret tunnel. He returns to the outside world not with rage, but with icy precision. Each visit is silent, each murder clinical. Director Laszlo Benedek doesn't saturate the film with sound or suspense music. Instead, he lets the snow speak. He lets doors creak. He lets the audience wait too long in quiet corridors. There are scenes where no one says anything for minutes at a time, yet the tension climbs like steam in a sealed room. Max von Sydow plays Salem with the kind of internalized madness that never erupts, it simmers. You don't know if you fear him because of what he might do, or because of what he already has. And in that silence lies the true horror. He is not unpredictable. He is methodical. He is patient. The Night Visitor didn't make much noise when it was released, but that's fitting, because some monsters don't roar. They whisper with their footsteps, and they kill with their quiet. Number 14. Images, 1972. Few films evoke madness as quietly as Robert Altman's Images. It's a film that doesn't try to convince you of its horror, it simply isolates you in it. The story follows Catherine, a children's author, as she retreats to a countryside home and begins seeing spectral versions of people from her life. Are they ghosts? Are they memories? Or is her mind fracturing in real time? Altman offers no answer. Instead, he gives you silence. Long, unbroken stretches of silence. Conversations die before they begin. Scenes unfold without score. Just ambient wind and breathing. The film becomes a psychological prison made more terrifying because you're the only one inside. Susanna York's performance is a slow-motion breakdown. Her face does most of the talking, her eyes most of the screaming. The line between hallucination and reality blurs not through special effects, but through stillness. One moment, she's cooking. The next, there's blood. And then, nothing. When Images was released, critics were divided. Some called it pretentious, others called it brilliant. But nearly all agreed it was difficult, uncomfortable, quiet in a way that forces attention, not rewards it. And for a horror film, that's dangerous territory. But that's also where its genius lies. Images doesn't entertain, it unsettles. It doesn't terrify, it erodes. Like a slow leak in a locked room, it makes you aware of the air around you and the silence within you. Number 15. Something Evil, 1972. Before Steven Spielberg changed the language of cinema, he crafted a made-for-TV horror film that barely spoke above a whisper. Something Evil aired once in 1972 and then quietly receded into obscurity. But those who saw it didn't forget. They remembered the eerie pacing, the oppressive farmhouse silence, and a creeping sense of dread that didn't rely on a single scream. The plot is deceptively simple. A young couple moves into a remote Pennsylvania farmhouse with their children, hoping to find peace. What they find instead is an unseen presence that manifests not in noise, but in stillness. There are no dramatic possessions or grotesque demons, just jars of red goo, strange wind chimes, and the absence of sound at moments when your skin most expects it. Spielberg, then in his mid-20 seconds, plays with the grammar of fear. He withholds music where other directors would flood the scene. He lets the camera sit too long. He lets characters breathe and then holds that breath just a second too long. The result is a film that feels less like a ghost story and more like a haunted object itself. It was dismissed at the time as too slow, too ambiguous. But maybe Something Evil wasn't made for mass understanding. Maybe it was Spielberg whispering before he ever shouted. And maybe that whisper still echoes in the silent spaces of modern horror. Bonus fact: Hush. Hush, Sweet Charlotte, Etusine, og 964. Before the scream became cinema's favorite weapon, there was Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte. It didn't need to shout. It only needed a whisper. Bette Davis plays Charlotte Hollis, a woman trapped in her decaying Louisiana mansion, surrounded by ghosts that may or may not be real. Her house is filled with memories, her silence with suspicion. The walls seem to breathe with guilt. Every echo sounds like a name she's trying to forget. Director Robert Aldrich doesn't rush the terror. He lets it seep in through the floorboards, the sound of cicadas outside, the slow swing of a chandelier, the faint murmur of someone who isn't there. What frightens you isn't what you see, but what you hear when the film goes still. Davis doesn't scream her madness. She lets it simmer in her throat, tremble in her eyes, haunt her posture. The silence becomes unbearable because it's the sound of a woman realizing that the worst ghosts are the ones that live in memory. By the time the truth arrives, it doesn't feel like revelation. It feels like confession. And in that final quiet, the film proves something chilling. Sometimes, you don't need to hear the scream, you just need to know it never stopped. Silence doesn't end when the film fades to black. It lingers in the walls, in the eyes of those who watched, in the space between heartbeats. These films were never meant to make you scream. They were meant to make you listen to what hides inside the quiet. Because silence remembers. It keeps every fear, every pause, every breath you try to forget. So before you leave this list behind, take one more moment, listen, and ask yourself, what's still waiting for you in the silence?